So I live in France, and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended, and I was 19 at that time. After the lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks there. I got tested before, and there were no problems. My grandparents live in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite a big dog. When I was really young, I lived at my grandparents for a year, and at that time the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy, in French, which kind of means little devil in English, but in a sort of an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there, though, I played with her a lot. But suffice it to say that we're both really close, and this will have its importance later. So two of my hobbies are having long walks and running. Thus, every evening I was out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest there too, that's sort of on a small hill, and on top of that a big place with lots of fields there. I actually run there a lot, so I know the place pretty well. The air is fresh and the view is beautiful, so I was going to go there with the dog every day. And it was also helping my grandparents to have her doing lots of exercise. But the first time we went there too, nothing special happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It's about 6 to 7 kilometers, so basically an hour's walk. And the next day, when we arrived on the top of the hill in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m, but there was still some light because it was summer. But there were 3 other people walking in the fields. They were younger than me, probably about 15 or 16. I also noticed that they were smoking, so my guess was that they used to come up here so that they couldn't be seen by their parents. But we went past them, and I greeted them, and they greeted me back. Once again, nothing special. In fact, for a whole week I did this walk around the same time, 10 p.m, and even passed by those 3 guys with nothing else happening. The second week, as usually, I went for the walk with the dog Chippy, and I arrived at the fields. There were only one of those 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time, though, and when he saw me, I was at the entrance of the field just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually had in my pocket. So I told him, yeah, sure. And he walked with me, his hand in the pockets of his hoodie. When he came near, for some reason, I just felt a shiver. It's crazy, too, how sometimes your instincts just know that there's a problem, but often we don't listen to them, right? Because nothing looks weird. I handed over the lighter, though, when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. And then everything just happened so quickly. He did a really fast movement with his hand coming from his hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I was just quick enough to throw myself back, and I fell hard on the floor. And I quickly realized that it was a knife that he was holding, and he had just tried to stab me. And what actually saved me was my dog. God bless her. Because when she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him and he fell down. As I said before, it's a really big dog. I immediately got up to my feet though, and I heard something from behind me. From the entrance of the forest, I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running at me. I surmised quickly that these were probably his 2 friends. Now, in this moment, your brain acts for itself, and you don't think at all, and in this case, the answer that I found was really simple. The other guy was still on the ground. I just watched my dog and I told her, run. I started running and she followed me, but I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up as well, because he said catch him and don't let him go. At this moment, I was totally terrified. I was running and running. I was hearing them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long will they follow me, and who the heck are they? This was the first time that I was really happy to be a runner too. I was clearly better than these guys, and I think that actually saved me this day, because they chased me for what felt like an eternity, really. Fortunately, though, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest, and this time it descends to the road at the end. I heard the steps of the 3 guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and I locked myself in. I caught my breath and I gave my dog a huge hug. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what had happened, and I've never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents and we called the police, but unfortunately they didn't find anyone. I really don't know what those guys wanted, but the animal masks, they really made me think about some kind of Satanism or cult or something. I really don't want to know either way, but it was weird. I still do long walks with Chippy, the hero dog, but I now go earlier and to places with a little more people. Please forgive me too if anything I said was spoken a little bit weird, as, like I said, I am from France. But thanks for listening. This encounter took place at the hotel that I worked at last year. I was 20 years old working in a small mom-and-pop hotel in Ontario, California. I had worked there for some time before I had started to stay there for a few months. But the owner taught me too everything that I needed to know so I could run his business while he went on a business trip to Africa. Mind you, I didn't have a car, so my only option was to stay there and work around the clock if need be. The good news, though, was that I didn't have to pay for the room, and I got to wash my clothes in the laundry room for free. There was a grocery store in walking distance too, and restaurants all around me where I could get food at a discounted price since I worked at the hotel. And quite honestly, I thought it was a sweet deal. Now, one night, my boyfriend came down to visit, and while he was in the bathroom, I heard banging coming from the room next to ours. Then I heard scratching on my walls. I told him to stop playing, and he didn't even know what I was talking about, though. The banging continued all night, so I called the front desk and told them that the people next to me were loud and I had to be up at 6 to go down there to work. But she was quiet for a while, and then told me that she hadn't rented out that room next to mine. Mind you, I also had an end room. I quickly ran outside to see if the curtains were open or closed, and they were open. I could see right into that room, and nobody was in there. This was an outside hotel, and I had never been so creeped out in my life, to be honest. And so, in the end, I decided to sage the room to rid any of it of bad spirits or energy and that stuff, and that seemed to work for a while, until it just didn't. The next time, I swear to you that something demonic happened. I was asleep, and I kept hearing whispers in my sleep. I hate whispers with a passion, and they sort of creep me out, even at the best of times, so I sat up in bed and I was looking around the dark room, and in the corner of the room I saw white glowing eyes staring at me. I felt frozen by its glare. I could see its body and saw that it was crouched down holding its knees. Then I saw more shadows appearing closer and closer. I reached to turn on the lamp next to the bed, and it didn't cut on. So my next thought was that I needed to run outside and get to safety. It took all the balls in the world for me to get up and run outside. I was so scared that I couldn't even feel my legs. All I could feel were the cold wooden floorboards beneath me. I got to the door and flung it open, only to see that the bedroom curtains were on the outside of my room's window. The sky was black and the clouds were a dark, dark green with grey tints. I was mortified to realize that I must have still been asleep and I hadn't actually woken up yet. I looked back inside the hotel room and saw myself asleep in the bed. I screamed bloody murder, and then that's when I jolted awake for real. After that, I said a prayer, and eventually I got back to sleep. But the encounter that followed was worse. I went back to sleep, and yet again I could hear things in my sleep. I was scared, and I couldn't move any of my body. I started to pray in my head as loud as I could, only to awake and feel my body slam on the bed as if I was levitating. After that, I called my grandma the next day, and she said that it was a demonic attack. I got in my car shortly after a few days later, and I never stayed in that hotel ever again. I was also severely depressed at the time I was staying there, and I don't know, maybe that attracted something because I've heard other people say something similar. But I never stayed there again, and to be honest, I never intend to again. So this was back in high school and prom night. I was a sophomore loser just helping take down decorations, so no booze for me, full disclosure. I was 16, and it might have been 1 o'clock in the morning by the time that I was driving home from the train station where prom was held. Actually a really nice venue, to be honest, in rural southern VA. At the time, I drove this piece of crap 1994 F-150, which was built like a frickin' tank, and I wasn't super familiar with the roads around the train station, but the one that I was on had cornfields on both sides for a few acres back. Then it turned into the deep woods. I'm headed home doing maybe 45 when, all of a sudden, half of my truck just pops up and down like I've hit the mother of all speed humps on one side. And, having just got my license, I was like, oh shit. So I pulled over to make sure that I hadn't messed up a blown tire. I put the truck in park and look back for a second, and when I do, I see this huge mass just laying in the middle of the road that 100% was not there when I stopped. My first instinct was, I just killed someone's dog, and my heart drops. I've got my hand on the door handle, ready to go see if this dog is okay, when the hairs on my arms just stand up. On instinct, I look in the rearview mirror to see this thing getting up, and at first I was kind of stoked, and maybe surprised that it was bigger than I thought, but stoked that it was alive, and then it really stood up, like on 2 legs. Mind you, this was all illuminated by my crappy brake lights in the middle of nowhere, and I was pretty freaked out. But when it stood up, I could tell that it was kind of hunched over. And even then, it was almost as tall as the 9 or 10 foot corn in the fields. It had a massive rib cage, emaciated, long face. A hollow-looking thing just stood up and looked dead at me before shuffling across the road back into the fields. And at that, I just took off and drove home and cried a bit. And eventually, when I got home, I just went to sleep. I found a massive dent in my fender the next morning, and I knew that I had really hit something. It messed me up for a good while, and even now I still don't like driving at night. A few years ago, me and my friend had decided to check out an old house that we had found. It was at the edge of some woods in a clearing and pretty derelict. Overall, it looked pretty eerie, but we were looking for an adventure, so we carried on with our plan. The front door was boarded shut pretty tight, so we headed to the back and it was also boarded up. Next to the door was a window that looked fairly easy to slide up. The glass was broken and there were cobwebs on the inside. We looked through the window and noticed the inside was pretty empty aside from a few bottles on the floor. We managed to slide the window up and we climbed inside. And instantly, there was a smell that I can only describe as just putrid like garbage. The room that we were in, though, seemed to have previously been a lounge or a dining room or something, but there was no furniture, obviously. Directly across from where we had entered, there was an old kitchen. The floor tiles had been removed, along with any appliances, leaving the walls pretty much bare, aside from outlines of where they had previously been. We moved into the next room, which still had the carpet and an old painting hung on the wall above a door next to it, where a few empty bottles of what I assume was alcohol were. We opened the door, and there were these stairs leading downstairs into darkness, and when we opened the door, we could just barely hear a faint tapping noise coming from down there. We didn't have a flashlight, so we didn't want to go down there. So we just closed the door and headed towards the staircase at the end of the room. But as we headed up, we noticed the smell in the air was just getting stronger. At the top, none of the rooms had doors apart from one. The door was black, and it looked like it was covered in scratches that kind of looked like claw marks. One of the rooms was a bathroom that was empty, apart from a bathtub. The bottom was covered in yellow spots, but by the tub there were loads and loads of syringe-like needles, probably about 10 or 15 of them on the floor, next to some newspaper and string. We moved over to the room with the door, and it seemed like the smell was coming from this room. We opened the door slowly, and it was pretty dark inside, as the window was covered up. There were lots of garbage bags on the floor, and in the corner, there was a sleeping bag that seemed to have something inside of it. We thought that we could see feet popping out of the bottom, so we slowly closed the door and thought that we should probably just leave in case that was actually someone in there. We headed back downstairs, and when we did, we noticed that the basement door was slightly open now. We're almost 100% certain, too, that we had closed it, so we just ran for the window. As we were climbing out, we heard something smash inside, so we started running and we just didn't look back. When I think back to this day now, I realize that what we did was pretty stupid. It could have been a very close call with someone dangerous. I just finished my shift working as a receptionist for a gym. I worked the opening shift, so I was there from 4:30 AM until around 11 AM. I hadn't slept at all the night before, so I decided to order an Uber so that I could get home as soon as possible. When I got into the car, he noticed my uniform and started asking me about my work, my boss, my co-workers, my customers. He kept asking if they were fit and good-looking guys and all that sort of stuff. I'm usually okay with a bit of idle chat with Uber drivers, but these 20 questions were a bit much. He then became insistent that I should use my looks to get promoted by flirting with my boss. Said things like, just promise you'll sleep with him if he gives you a raise. And meathead guys are so stupid that they'll do anything for a girl who smiles at them. I made a disgusted face and said that I wasn't interested in sleeping with my boss, trying to deter the conversation. He said, you don't actually have to sleep with him, just get the raise, and then if he tries anything, threaten to take him to HR. I kept saying that I wouldn't do anything like that, and I found that kind of thing inappropriate, and he kept insisting that this was the only way to get ahead of my other female co-workers, and if I was a smart woman, I would use the advantages society gave me. At that point, I was completely done listening to him, but wasn't any closer to my home, so I just stopped responding. He then said, oh, I get it, you're a good girl type. You're probably just waiting for Prince Charming to take interest in you and beg you to marry him, right? Again, I just said nothing. I'm not the type to defend myself to someone that I'll never see again. He then went on this rant about how all marriages are a sham and it's impossible for any human to be monogamous with one person because it's just not in our instincts to only sleep with one person, and that I'd be wasting my time being celibate because I should be having sex with as many men as possible since I'm biologically made to breed and take care of children, and I'd feel much more fulfilled if I just did that. And yes, this dude actually said all of that out loud. I could barely believe it myself, and I was there listening to it. We finally made it to my address, though, and he turned around and asked if I had an Instagram and if he could follow it, and also asked if I would rate him 5 stars. I told him that I didn't have an Instagram, and I just got out of the car and kept walking up the street, past my house, until he drove away. I don't know what this guy's problem was, but man, he gave off some really creepy and weird vibes.